Right now, John McMullen joins us to talk a little football. We tried to get into these issues yesterday. We didn't really get past the officiating. Go figure, right, John?
Yeah, officiating. Can't talk enough about it. I don't know why this league doesn't figure out that it's an issue. I've talked about years, just the existence of people like Mike Pereira and Dean Blandino says there's a problem. And by that, I mean not their future, their former jobs when they were head of officiating. That's fine. But when you have to have a rules analyst expert on the telecast, something's wrong. Something is wrong. And it tells you don't need that in basketball. You don't need it in baseball, but you need it in football.
Yeah, there's no question that that's going to be a big something that the people are going to keep an eye on. I do want to ask you about this whole thing with the Saints. I mean, Ben Watson came out. He's a pretty well-respected individual in the NFL, tweeting at the commissioner. You know, do you anticipate that the league will say something, do something, make a statement regarding the call in the game against the Saints?
No, I mean today
should
they
they?
I think they should. I think but this league has a history of being very poor with public relations and spinning things the correct way, and that goes far beyond officiating. That goes with basically everything. So they're really bad at that. It's too late now. You can't sort of draft a statement at this point. So they find. They find for the head-to-head hit, which is a clear indication that they said it should have been a penalty. And they've already acknowledged to everybody they need to acknowledge that the pass interference should have been called as well. So essentially they missed two calls on the same play, which is bad. I'm not trying to defend it, but I think there has been an overreaction to the human error, which has existed for a very long time, and it'll continue to exist. And, of all the people, I think Kurt Warner was the best. And if you think about it, and he's completely 100% correct. And he said he spent 30 years of his life trying to be the best quarterback he could be. And he's in the Hall of Fame, obviously. He ended up being a very good quarterback. And he certainly was never perfect. So he can't hold himself to that standard. How do you expect officials to be perfect? It's something you can never reach, and people expect that. And I think it's kind of ludicrous, to be honest.
I think the one difference, I guess, sometimes is when the officials make a call of these magnitudes that cost these teams games and legacies, and sometimes it costs these people jobs because they lost a game based on something like that. Where the player, if he makes a bad throw,
I agree. And
Kurt Warner's not getting cut because he missed the guy underneath.
No, but I will say this, and I've used this myself as an example of the NFL should try to do everything possible to improve the officiating to the point where it's as good as possible. I don't argue that because it does cost people jobs and livelihoods, and it goes far beyond players and coaches. It involves support staff and secretaries and people you don't even think about who work in the office, because if the coaching staff gets fired, there's a whole host of support people that get fired as well. But while I say that, if you want to think about it that way, there are decisions made by coaches and players that cost teams games and cost other players jobs as well. It's a tough industry, and it's a bottom line industry. And sure, when you lose on a play that you probably would have won on, it's difficult to take. But I'll also say that there are many, many other plays in that game. If you think about it as a whole, you go all the way back to the first quarter and the Saints' inability to punch it in the end zone. That's a part of it as well. You can't just look at one play. And I remember, Mike, going all the way back to the preseason when the NFL made these new rules and they were really amping up calling, roughing the passer, protecting the quarterback helmet to helmet before they scaled back. And I told everybody at that time, these rules are going to cost you games, so you kind of accept it. And if you don't accept it, you're going to have a lot of angst. And that's where the Saints are. That's where we are with this game, unfortunately. It's over-legislated. We talked about that yesterday. I don't know. They're not scaling it back. So as a player, I call it the Serenity Prayer League. Control what you can control. That's what coaches preach. That's what players preach. And that's all you can do.
Yeah. And the ratings are up.
And the ratings are always up. I mean, that's part of it. The product, people continue to watch, and people continue to buy the merchandise. And as long as that goes the way it's going, there's no impetus for the NFL to change, to be honest.
Dan Graziano came up with a bunch of issues for this offseason. We talked about yesterday, we didn't even get into the second one. It was all about the officiating because it's such a big issue, and people do talk about it, and people still, I'm having lunch today with my father, and he says, man, the officials in it, because it's the first time I sat down with him, but it's still top of mind where he brought it up to me, It's like, man, the officials in that game last week, yeah, they were terrible. And they're bad every week. But there's a part of me that says just saying they're bad every week has to stop. Like, that's all, right?
Yeah, they're not. If you go back to when they did have replacement officials and there was a strike, it was far worse. It's a very difficult game to officiate. Yeah. The people that do
and
it.
I will say, John, just for the football fan out there, I was at the Sixers game the other night, and all I kept saying is, these NBA officials are embarrassingly bad. They're awful.
Yeah, well, I know, and people will get to the playoffs in the NBA, and you'll hear some of the same things, and we'll get to the playoffs in Major League Baseball, and people will complain about the strike zone on particular nights. This is nothing new. It's just the immediacy. This is the last thing that happened. It's unfortunate that it probably cost the Saints the game. But there were opportunities after that for them to win the game. It's not saying it's correct, but you can't just boil it down to that. And I go back to Sean Payton's post-game press conference because people take the first couple sentences where he said they admitted the mistake. It was a horrible call. He's right. But then people forget or they stop listening. He also added the context. And to his credit, he said that. He essentially said, but we had opportunities after that.
Yeah.
We weren't able to take advantage of it. So I gave him a lot of credit for that.
Couple issues. Guaranteed contracts. Is this something that you think they will end up winning at some point? The players will be able to turn the tables and kind of get contracts into their favor?
Well, yes and no. We already have the first sort of monster guaranteed contract, and that was Kirk Cousins last year, got 3 years fully guaranteed. You can get fully guaranteed contracts. The problem is there's a give and take. You're not getting 5-6 years. If you want fully guaranteed contracts, they're going to be 1-2 year deals. And ultimately, yes, I think they can go in that direction. Essentially, they already have them. When you see a 5-year deal or a 6-year deal for a star player, those first 2 years are generally all guaranteed. And that's what sort of football has, the framework it is. And you just can't sign 6-7 year contracts fully guaranteed because of the injury rate. It's just not feasible in this sport. So there's a give and take there. And essentially, if you want to look at it in one way, players already have guarantees, but they're guarantees for a shorter time frame because of the injury realities in the NFL.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. Another issue, expanding the game day rosters from 46 to 53. Now, I'm assuming the coaches would love this, and why is that not something that is already into motion?
Well, the old theory was strategy, but I think there's no reason for it any longer, especially in the modern era where there's so much concern over concussions, and people will be taken out of the game by independent neurologists, for instance. And all of a sudden, if you get hit at the wrong position, you don't have enough players to play. So I think that was a rule sort of formulated in a different era that did improve the strategy aspect of the game. But in this era, it doesn't make any sense. You need those extra bodies because guys can be pulled from the game and not by coaches and by independent people. So I think you have to add that into the equation and realize that there's 53 players on the team. Everybody who's healthy should be able to dress and should be able to play.
Punt kickoff rule changes. We saw a lot change this past year. Do we anticipate they tweak it more? Because there's some talk, before last year that, the next evolution will be that this play is out, the kickoff at least.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is the on-field kick at the end of the game. It's virtually non-existent percentage-wise. You just can't. Obviously, it was heavily against you under the old rules, but there was a possibility you can recover an onside kick, and that created some excitement in end-of-the-game situations. It's almost impossible to recover an onside kick unless it's a complete surprise in today's NFL. So that has sort of impacted what I just talked about, strategy and excitement and end-of-game situations. There's some talk of sort of you can go for an onside kick or maybe a 4th and 15 and do it that way. I don't like gimmicks. I think this league is too popular. Anytime I see gimmicks, I think about hockey. I think about sports. I think about minor league baseball, minor league basketball, where you have to draw a fan base. But this league is facing some issues as far as the safety part of it, and it's affected the game. It's affected the excitement. It's affected the strategy, and I got to come up with something.
This article suggests that one idea that's been brought up is giving teams a definitive number of punts per game, like they do with challenges, so that you could only punt, say, 4 times a game. So you would have to decide when you want to use those punts.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example. I don't like it. It's a gimmick. And by the way, I don't think you really need that, because you've skewed things to the offense as much as you have, and you have the mentality of coaches getting more aggressive anyway. So if you're plus, even minus 45, a lot of coaches are going to go for 4th and short yardage. So that's the way the NFL is going anyway. I don't think you need that rule. And generally, if you punt 8 times in a game today, it's because you're so ineffective offensively, you're getting blown out anyway. So I don't think that would have much of an impact.
We also know that the player safety rules this year were implemented a lot. Do we anticipate or see any more changes that will alter the game even more next season?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people will, and rightfully so, point out that they made these changes. They called them in the preseason. They called them early in the season, and then they stopped calling. And they stopped calling them for a reason, because people were upset. So you have this sort of give and take. In the off season, people always say you got to be concerned about the players. You got to protect the players. And then they get to the season, and you have this awful product, and they sort of just want their football back. So it is. I'll defend the NFL there, because it's a tough landscape to sort of get through. Because you have these two sort of situations where when people aren't watching the game, they, whatever you want to call it, virtue signal, act like, they're better than other people from a moral standpoint, and say you have to protect these players. And then when the games start, they completely forget it. So I don't know how you solve that, to be honest.
John, I want to, I wanted to get your take real quick because one of the issues he brought up, Dan Graziano, ESPN.com, wrote this, being more diverse. I don't recall hearing about the Rooney Rule at all this offseason. It just seemed like coaches got hired and nobody reported about any, candidates. It was just like this guy was hired.
No, you still have it. And in fact, they made it a little bit more meaningful in the fact that you couldn't just interview somebody in your organization. A lot of people got around it by interviewing an assistant coach of color or something of that nature. Now you have to go outside the organization. I know at the Super Bowl, they're going to talk about having two sort of quality control positions on coaching staffs that have to be given to people of color. Because one of the issues is obviously where you look for the next head coaches generally are former coordinators, obviously current coordinators, and there aren't enough minorities in those positions. And how do you get them in those positions? And they never get to start, and they never get to start climbing the ladder. So I think maybe having that rule and sort of starting more minority candidates out on coaching staffs will get them on a faster track. But it's certainly a concern. It doesn't look good for the league, and it's another one of those tough discussions. And it's difficult to say to any owner, look, you need to hire this guy, you need to hire that guy. They generally look for who they believe is the best candidate, but it's a bad look for the league, no question about it.
John, coming up, the Super Bowl is next Sunday, but that's not the end of football. February the 9th, we have football. The Alliance of American Football will begin. Will it gain any traction? Will anybody care? It's all by itself. It's right after. I mean, I think it's timed perfectly. The Super Bowl, if you want more football, it's not like you're waiting until April. They're putting it right after Super Bowl Sunday.
And then the next year, you'll have the XFL with the AAF. And then there's another league, a Pacific League. How many football leagues do we need? I think it's obviously good for the players to be able to make a living. As far as these leagues generating interest, I think it'll be a lot like a minor league in other sports, which we've seen. There'll be a niche audience, but not much more than that. This society as a whole has kind of proven they'll pay and they'll watch a major league product. They won't necessarily do that for a minor league product. So, no, I don't think as far as being a big part of our culture or generating big television ratings or tremendous success. Mm-hmm. No, I don't think any of these leagues are going to be a success.
Well, I remember the first XFL game had record ratings, and then it completely had the worst ratings. But you wonder if there will be just enough intrigue and interest. Is the timing right to say, hey, it's a football game? Okay. I mean, I don't know what channel it's even on. Who's carrying? It is CBS, right? It is
CBS. Yeah, CBS is. And I think you're going to see, and I've heard from a couple of different sources, the XFL is going to sign a TV deal probably within the next week or two, and they're going to get more money than people think because live sports kind of is the only thing that is proven to be DVR-proof in today's television environment. So everybody's looking for live sports products to put on television. And that's why you see these leagues popping up, because they think they can get television money. I don't know how long that will last as soon as the leagues actually start and the ratings start coming in, and they're not good, because that's what I expect to happen.
I'm intrigued. I'm going to sit down on Sunday and watch the Alliance.
Well, I think a lot of people will watch, as you mentioned. The first go-round of the XFL, people watched and then said, this is an awful product, and they stopped watching. I think the same thing is going to happen this time.
By the way, The teams are in. Let's see, real quick. Let me see. You got the Atlanta Legends.
Teams?
Yeah, the Atlanta Legends, the Birmingham Iron, the Memphis Express, the Orlando Apollos, the Arizona Hot Shots, the Salt Lake Stallions, the San Antonio Commanders, and the San Diego Fleet.
Yeah, the San Diego Fleet, their quarterback is Josh Johnson.
Wow. How about the coaches in this league, though, here? Mike Martz, Mike Riley, Dennis Erickson, Rick Neuheisel, Steve Spurrier is back on the side. How old is he, 80? Mike Singletary. I want winners in Memphis.
And Brad Childress was the Atlanta coach and already bailed out.
Yeah, I've
so
seen
there
a lot
are
of these
guys. Yeah, there are guys already bailing. But
see, at least there's some interesting head coaches.
I think Devontae Ballsby is on San Antonio.
Okay.
So if you want to see some old Eagles, there'll be some old
there's
Eagles.
There's some interesting coaches in there. It'll be interesting, like if Mike Martz's San Diego Fleet are putting up 50 a game, if he gets some intrigue, you know?
Yeah, I think that'll happen with both coaches and players. I think players, especially quarterbacks, will get a chance to be noticed.
I'm gonna read.
You remember the old World League?
Yeah.
Brad Johnson, Jake Delhomme, Kurt Warner. That's where they got noticed.
All right, man. Well, have a nice weekend. I know we're be down at Radio Row, and forget the Super Bowl. Let's get ready for the Alliance.
You're right. AAF. I'm a big San Diego Fleet guy.
Mike Martz. Take care, man.
All right, Mike.